Now that we have a quorum, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order so we can I appreciate all of you in the audience hanging out with us for a bit. So I'm sorry to delay your evening. So we always start these meetings off with an opportunity for public testimony on things that are not on this agenda. And I'm seeing a few people in the audience, and I'm assuming that you are all here for the actual agenda item. So, but otherwise, if you would like to testify about something not on the agenda item, now is a great time to do that, but I don't think I'm seeing anyone. So we are going to just jump straight into the public hearing for ZDO 270, the minor TSP amendments, and I have a nice little script that I'm required to read, so I hope you all will bear with me. The public hearing is now open for consideration of ZDO 270, a legislative proposal to amend the Clackamas County Transportation System Plan. The Planning Commission is charged with making a recommendation on the application to the Board of County Commissioners. The record from this hearing will be forwarded to the board, which will make the final decision in the matter. The board will conduct another hearing on the application on October 3rd at 9:30 a.m. That hearing will be de novo, meaning that the hearing will be started anew and additional testimony may be offered. Tonight's hearing will not go beyond 10 p.m. If not concluded, it will be continued to a date and time certain. The hearing may be continued for other reasons as well. If an announcement of an additional hearing date and time is made tonight, it will be the only notice given of that additional hearing. I don't think that's going to be an issue. So the conduct of the hearing, we'll just go ahead and start right through here. Public hearing will be conducted as follows. Planning and Zoning Division staff will give a report, and then I'll follow through the rest of this as we go along. So welcome.
Thank you.
Off to the staff.
Okay, great. Good evening. I'm Steve Williams. I'm a Principal Transportation Planner with DTD. And so I have given each of you a copy of the presentation that I'm going to be making, but it pretty well tracks with what you received in the staff report earlier. So I hope there won't be any issues there, but please feel free to ask me any questions that you might have. What we have tonight are three minor amendments to Chapter 5 of the Comprehensive Plan, which is our Transportation System Plan. Each of them, I should say none of them actually make any changes to the text of the Comprehensive Plan. The only thing that's proposed to be changed tonight are to figures, maps, and the 172nd, 190th Corridor Management Plan, which is one of the appendices to the Transportation System Plan. The amendments all conform to current county practice, but these three amendments are all very different. And so I just want you to understand in advance that I'm going to do one and then move on to the second one. But please feel free to ask me any questions you have as I go along, because even though these are all minor amendments, I want to make sure that you all have a good understanding of where we're going on these. Excuse me. Oh, sorry. Yeah, she had to remind me to push the button. So we have three minor changes, as I noted. We have minor adjustments to our urban and rural road cross sections, which will be our first item, and that is mainly so that those conform to existing national standards and county practice. We need to readopt the Southeast 172nd Avenue 190th Drive Corridor Management Plan to be consistent with changes that have been made by our partner, the City of Happy Valley. And we also need to split one project in the Transportation System Plan project list to enable an applicant to mitigate traffic impact from a project by building a county priority road project. So we'll start with the revisions to the cross sections.
Steve, I would just, sorry to interrupt, but I would suggest that if you go ahead, let's go ahead and take questions after the end of each of those segments. That way we can kind of keep everything streamlined. So,
that sounds great.
Yeah.
In the revision to the cross sections, in the Transportation System Plan and in transportation planning practice generally, we deal with what we call different functional classifications of roadways. And we call them different functional classifications because they each serve different purposes in our transportation system. The most extreme examples are an interstate highway like Interstate 205 is what we call a primary arterial, which is focuses on moving large volumes of traffic efficiently over longer distances. And the other extreme, of course, would be a local residential street, which is all about providing access to individual homes or apartment units and is not really designed to handle a large volume of traffic. The cross sections that we have in the Transportation System Plan depict our county standards for the arrangement of traffic lanes, presence of medians, the types of shoulders, bike lanes, curb and stormwater facilities, landscaping, and pedestrian facilities for each of the different types of functional classifications that we have. The adopted cross sections, which we're going to be talking about this evening, in certain situations can be modified to fit particular situations. So what you're going to be looking at this evening is the standard, but it is not what ends up being done in absolutely every situation. There are some situations where that does not fit, and in our roadway standards and in the ZDO and in the Transportation System Plan, we have provisions that allow us to vary that to fit those situations.
Could I ask you to
Yes, sure.
change the change to the where we're at?
There we go. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I keep forgetting to push the button here. The revisions that we're proposing are intended to fit adopted national and regional standards and our existing county practice. So we made, really, if you look at all of the cross sections that we're changing here, we made in total about 5 different types of changes to them. At the what's called the back of sidewalk, we added a minimum landscape strip of at least 6 inches. On the landscape strip between the sidewalk and the street, we added a 6-inch curb, so those generally went from being 5 feet wide to being 5 feet 6 inches wide. There are many places in the existing cross sections where we use the term optional, which we thought was too ambiguous, and so we decided to change that to as needed. We corrected the bikeway width ranges to be consistent with national and regional standards. We provided in the rural area some flexibility for gravel shoulder width and ditch width on the rural cross sections because those do vary quite a bit depending upon the situation, the kind of terrain, the presence of water in the area. And then finally, we updated the paved width and the right-of-way width to account for those other changes. So if you look at the bottom of the third page of your packet of slides, at that particular slide, you can see the changes that we're proposing to the typical urban major arterial cross-section. So a major arterial would be something like Sunnyside Road as an example. And so you can see that typically on major arterials, we have 2 travel lanes in each direction. We generally have a median or a left turn lane in the center, or perhaps in some situations both. We have bikeways at the outside of the travel lanes. Previously, those bike lanes were allowed to be 6 feet wide. The national standard is 8 feet. And so that's what we're moving to in this particular change. We have the landscape strip that I made reference to earlier that in our previous had been 5 feet, but we actually wanted a landscape strip and curb that was 5 feet of landscape and the curb, so we're increasing that to 5'6" so that we end up getting both. And then we usually have pedestrian facilities on both sides of the major arterials, and the width of the pedestrian facilities can vary from 6 feet to 8 feet depending upon the type of pedestrian facility. You'll also notice there are some notes at the bottom of each of the cross sections, and we have made some changes in those primarily to clarify the meaning of those notes. So we actually, most of the changes we made can be seen on this single page, the typical urban major arterial cross section. If you look at the other cross sections, the urban minor arterial cross section has, we basically repeated several of the same changes. The same thing is true on the urban collector cross section, where again, we repeated some of the same changes that we had on the previous two. On the urban connector local cross section, we originally had two cross sections that were exactly the same, the urban connector and the urban local, and so we simply combined those to be one combined cross section because the details were the same. And then finally, I didn't create a slide because there were no changes to it, but we have an urban alley cross section. We occasionally see projects come in where the applicants want to have an alley behind the units for, auto access, garages, things like that. Then on the rural cross section, again, the main change that took place on the rural cross sections, like this rural arterial cross section that I'm showing now, is the change to the width of the gravel shoulder and the ditch. The width we need for the gravel shoulder really depends upon the width of the paved shoulder that we have. So if we have almost no paved shoulder, then we want to see a full width gravel shoulder, which is generally around 8 feet wide. On the other hand, if we have a full paved shoulder or close to a full paved shoulder, then we typically look at a narrower gravel shoulder. And the ditch, really the width of the ditch varies based on hydrologic issues, on how much water that we expect the ditch is going to need to convey. That is the main change that took place on the rural cross sections. The one other issue is on the rural arterial cross section. These are the main roads that the county has in some of our unincorporated communities. And so there were some changes made to this particular cross section to help create a little bit more of a town type of feeling in those areas. And so if you look at the changes that we made here, many of them are consistent with the changes that were made on the urban cross sections. And that pretty much covers all the rural changes except for figure 5-2E, where we once again combined the connector cross section and the local cross section. So those are the cross section changes that we're proposing. Are there any other questions or issues that you might like to raise before I move on to the next item?
I think we have a couple. Mary?
I have one kind of overall question about all of the cross sections. You mentioned a few instances of where there's a range of widths. What kinds of circumstances would put you on either end of the range of widths? You mentioned it for the last one, for the rural arterial, for the gravel in the ditch, but for the parking and the travel lane widths, can you talk about reasons that would vary to one side or the other?
The parking lane varies mainly based on the amount of traffic on the street. So on higher traffic streets, we go with wider parking lanes.
Okay.
To a lesser extent, it also varies with the bikeway.
And the
And
travel
what was
lane?
the second one you asked
The
about?
travel lanes?
The travel lanes, again, vary with the amount of traffic that we have on the street. And I think I'm just looking at the collector right now, but I see the same thing on the minor arterial. There's a lot of variation in the volume that that we have on those types of roads. Some of them are fairly high volume, some less so.
Okay.
And so what we're trying to do is figure out the safest cross-section for the public in that particular situation.
Okay, that's my question.
I had a question.
Sure thing.
In the, say, for example, figure 5-1A, the typical urban major
Sure.
arterial cross-section, where we're adding, in other words, we're adding 6 inches to the landscape strip, and we're adding to the back of the sidewalk, so we're adding width. Where are we getting that from? Is this only for newly constructed, or if we're dealing with existing, where are we going to get that additional width from?
Yeah, and one of the things to keep in mind is that on an existing road, we are usually building to the existing cross-section, or we're requiring to build to the existing cross-section. We don't want to create that sort of gap tooth appearance where it gets wider and then it gets narrower and then it gets wider again. So generally, unless there's a very good reason to do something else, we're going to follow what's out there now. This mainly applies to new things that are being built.
Christine?
So I just have a quick question about the bike lane. And so on the top page, the urban major arterial cross-section, it shows that we're moving from the 6 feet to the 8 feet, which is the national standard. On the other cross-sections, it looks like it will vary for the other types of cross-sections. So is it only on the major arterial that will be the standard at 8 feet, and everywhere else it will vary between 6 and 8? Or are you going to 8 across the board?
No, we're mandating 8 on the major arterial because those are our highest travel streets and the traffic is moving the fastest on those streets. On the other streets, it's more like what I said earlier in response to Commissioner Phillips' question. It depends on the traffic and the speed of the traffic that we're seeing on the road.
It's only the new standard for urban major.
It's right. We can go up to 8 on the others, but 6 is the minimum on those. 8 is all that we're looking for on the major arterials.
Thank you.
So I just have a quick comment on the configuration. And these configurations, I'm sure, have been here forever and a day. But I know that in recent years, a lot of communities have been experimenting with this concept of getting the bikeway on the inside of either the parking alley or inside that landscaping strip. You know, and it just seems to improve safety all around from a variety of perspectives. Do we have the flexibility of making that happen? And is there been any discussion about how we can try to move in that direction countywide at all?
And as a matter of fact, when we look at the next item, the 172nd, 190th plan, one of the main change that took place on the cross-section there was that we had cycle track that was immediately adjacent to the travel lanes, and we moved it behind the landscape strip.
Awesome.
And there were really kind of 2 reasons for that. One, it was easier for us to maintain, but 2 was it was also safer.
Right. And I know it poses some safety problems, especially when you start getting turn lanes and whatnot, but overall, it seems to have been a good thing for a lot of communities. It's good to see it happening here.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on the cross-sections, or I move on to the 172nd, 190th plan? Okay. So the next item is modifications to the Southeast 172nd Avenue, 190th Drive Corridor Management Plan. As I mentioned earlier, this plan was created jointly by Clackamas County and Happy Valley and adopted in 2012. It was intended to create the north-south spine for the transportation system in that area in the east part of, I guess you would say, the Portland metro area. It's a multimodal plan, and so it incorporates improvements for pedestrians, bicycle, and transit modes in addition to the auto and truck modes. Happy Valley, over the course of, I guess, really the previous year now, worked with the original consultants and with Clackamas County staff to make minor changes to the plan that were both motivated by their update to their transportation system plan, and there were actually some things that we asked for in the course of that process as they were updating that. So on the next slide, I've got a list of the modifications that were made, and as you can see, most of them were very minor. We added the Happy Valley logo, changed the adoption date. We added an overall figure, 7-2E, and changed the pagination and table of contents to reflect that. We made revisions to figures 7A, 7-1A, 7-1B, 7-2A through D, and 7-3A. In the case of the changes to 7-2A through D, the only changes that took place were to Happy Valley's transportation road network that they identified in their comprehensive plan. And so we as a county don't have any discretion over that, and so we didn't even bother to give those to you, and that's why those are not in your packet this evening. And that was one of the major changes that Happy Valley made. The other one is the one that I already alluded to, moving the cycle track from a location adjacent to the traffic lanes back behind the landscape strip on several of the cross sections, and I'll point that out here in a minute when we get to those. The overview map, I found it hard to believe when I looked at the document, but originally there was no overview map, which is almost a standard item in a document like this, and so Happy Valley added one of those, and you can see it there on the screen, and you also received a copy of that. And that just shows the full extent of the project. And in blue, it also shows Happy Valley's plans for the ultimate road network out in that area, extending from 212 all the way up to the Multnomah County border. The next item on that same page, or on that same slide, is the 5-lane streetscape for cross-section that was worked on by our staff and the consultant staff and Happy Valley staff. And this is one in particular. You look at 5A-1, which is the top cross-section that you can see there. And what you'll notice is actually a little bit hard to see because it's so small, but the cycle track in the original drawings had been between the landscape strip and the travel lanes. Now, the cycle track was raised 6 inches and had a mountable curb, but it was still next to the travel lanes. That proved to be a problem for our transportation maintenance section, and also, as noted, people were starting to identify safety hazards with that type of design, and so we took advantage of the opportunity to push that cycle track behind the landscape strip, and that 5A-1 is the place where it shows up most clearly, although there are cycle tracks in several of the other cross sections as well.
You're showing a channel on the right side on the cycle track, is that?
Something bigger. Right side, cycle track. What do you mean, the planter?
On 5A-1, on cycle track on the right side of the page, you're showing a channel, an elevation difference.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that too, and I'm not sure why that's the case. Do you know why that's the case, Rick? Yeah, I think that's actually just a mistake in the drawing, because we wouldn't build it that way. You would build it, with one,
I think it has a white background, and when it was
That-
moved,
that-
when
that-
the image was moved over, it shows up.
Oh,
So the image is just a little bit too low.
You might be right. It's basically a flaw in the way we'll have to.
So I think the cycle track on the left is supposed to be what the
Yeah.
right is supposed to look like as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was an elevation issue
Right,
here.
yeah, I don't think so.
That's right.
Good eye.
Yeah, it's a graphics mistake, but good eye. Any other questions on the 172nd, 190th quarter management plan changes? Yes, sir.
Do we have underground utility? running in, is there a utility right-of-way on either sides?
Do you know where the utility right-of-way is here, Rick? Okay. Oh, yeah, PUE. It's all the way at the outside
Okay.
of those cross-section diagrams. Yeah, now on like 5B, it's underneath the sidewalk.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And in some cases, off to the right of the sidewalk.
That's right. Any other questions on 172nd, 190th Quarter Management Plan?
I don't see any.
Okay.
We'll move on.
Okay. And then the last item is the modifying Table 5-3C of the Transportation System Plan. One of the features of the Transportation System Plan is that we have project lists included, and we have over 400 transportation project improvements in our project lists. There are 4 tables of projects that are prioritized for funding. There's what we call the capital projects list, which represents what we expect to do in the next 5 years. There's a 20-year list, a long-term capital project list, which is what we'll be talking about this evening. And then there is also a project list for projects that we would like to see occur on other people's roads, primarily ODOT roads, but in some cases, city roads as well. So we're going to focus on Table 5-3C, the long-term capital projects. These particular projects are not expected to be constructed unless specific funding becomes available. On that list is project number 3029, which is identified as the West 82nd Avenue Parallel Road, and this is proposed to extend 79th Avenue from Luther Road to King Road. And the intent here in our transportation system plan is to improve access for local traffic, pedestrians, bicyclists, so that they can move north and south without having to go over and use 82nd. And in our previous TSP, there were actually 2 projects here, one that went from Luther Road to Johnson Creek Boulevard, and then the second one that went from Johnson Creek Boulevard down to King Road. In the last TSP update 5 years ago, those were combined. Lots of projects were combined. They were trying to simplify the project lists. What we're proposing tonight is actually to take project 3029 and split it back into the original 2 projects. 3029A, which would run from Luther Road to Johnson Creek Boulevard, and 3029B, that would run from Johnson Creek Boulevard to King Road. The reason that we are proposing to do this is an arcane little branch of knowledge called Transportation Facilities Concurrency. Under concurrency, the county is required to assure that the transportation system capacity is sufficient to serve proposed developments. Our ZDO identifies 6 ways for applicants to meet that concurrency requirements. Some of those are very simple. Land uses that don't generate any traffic to speak of, like cell towers, utility switching stations, things like that. There are also there are actually areas of the county that are exempt, and the concurrency requirements don't apply. There are projects that don't create enough of a traffic impact that they exceed the capacity of the transportation system, and so they meet the concurrency requirement. There are also projects that will have their traffic generation needs met by either a planned county project or a planned ODOT project that will take place and is programmed to take place in the next 5 years. And then finally, the last way to meet concurrency is to actually build one of our projects. And there are 3 conditions on that that are shown on your slide. The project the applicant needs to complete a project identified in one of the TSP project lists. The project must be in the area of the proposed development. In other words, it needs to serve the traffic from the proposed development. And then it has to have a minimum estimated construction cost of $527,000 in 2004 dollars. So we are proposing to divide Project 3029 into two projects because there is a developer, an applicant that has come in and wants to build the north half of that project, just the street. And I want to clarify this because it wasn't clear in my staff memo, just the street and not the intersection with Johnson Creek Boulevard. But they want to build that extending south almost to Johnson Creek Boulevard. And that would meet the concurrency requirement for their proposal using what is called the voluntary substantial contribution approach to meeting concurrency. By splitting the project, we avoid asking the applicant to pay for an improvement that is not impacted by their development and will not benefit their development. And as I mentioned earlier, in the last TSP, this was in fact two projects. And so if we were here 5 years ago, we wouldn't be having this particular conversation because it wouldn't be necessary to split the project.
By
Yes,
splitting
sure.
this, does the minimum construction cost also, does that double? As each one is a project now, A and B?
The minimum construction, it's longer from Johnson Creek Boulevard to King Road than it is on the north side. And so my guess would be that the south part is more expensive, just because it's a longer piece of road. But I don't have an estimate. Do you have an estimate on that, Rick?
We don't have a cost estimate for either one intersection that's satisfactory.
Yeah.
Was that a no? I didn't.
That was a no.
Okay.
Yeah. Are there other questions? I was just going to point out that there's a map that was both in your packet and is on the slide now. That kind of bright fuchsia color line in the left center, top left center, is the project. The north part, which is north of the green line, is the section from Luther to Johnson Creek Boulevard, and you can see the longer section in the south running from Johnson Creek Boulevard down to King Road. And this is what the revised table would look like. The description stays the same. The name of the project stays the same. The only thing that really changes is the beginning and ending points, to create the two new projects.
So if this proposed project is going to build the road section but not the intersection, what happens with the intersection?
What we are hoping to do is fund that out of county funds. And our traffic department, it's actually a high priority for them due to safety issues. And so they are trying to get traffic safety funds to help build that intersection. Because it is if any of you go through that particular area on Johnson Creek Boulevard, it can be a difficult place to make turns at this point, and they would like an intersection there to help facilitate the turning movements that need to take place there.
So just to clarify, so the applicant is proposing to fund the construction of 3029A, which
A.
is right, but not the intersection. And the idea is that they'll pay for the bulk of the project. The county would have to pick up the intersection
That's
part of
right.
it. And then, are there plans for 3029B? Will the county, is the county stepping that up? Or are we just going to sit there and wait for funding on that? Or
There's no funding or plans at this time for 3029B.
But having 3029A done will provide some impetus, I would think.
That's right. It already provides some benefit if you're familiar with that section of 82nd.
Right, I am.
It is very narrow and very constrained. And so it will be a really good opportunity to get pedestrians and bicyclists off of the ODOT facility onto a local road.
Great. Are there other questions on that third segment, Mark?
Oh, so 2004, it's like $1 million project. If they're willing to spend $1 million in infrastructure, you would then allow them to build, what is this project? What is the project that's, how many units is this?
Rick, do you want to speak to the project?
Rick, if you could come up, that would be great.
Is Rick with the county?
Yes, he is the manager of our transportation development section, so he's been dealing with this project in particular.
Welcome.
It is kind of awkward to sit at the back and just kind of bark out answers. So my name is Rick Nyes. I'm the Development Engineering Supervisor with Clackamas County. I don't have the exact numbers of units for the proposed development. It's 300-plus apartment units. And they would actually construct the extension of 79th Street to the north, so it intersects on the north at Luther. There's an existing portion of 79th down to Johns Creek Boulevard, and they would improve most of that and extend that road to the north, so we'd have a full connection from Luther all the way to Johns Creek Boulevard.
So the last meeting I was at, about a mile or two from here, the complaint was speeding to allow for a road to go all the way through to Milwaukee. I just find this kind of fascinating that, you know, the type of density, because that would infer the density that's coming, just to kind of point that out. I'd also like to say, this is the first time I've heard that this is kind of an option for planning, and when we see plans, would it benefit staff if we kind of point out, can you get this in $1 million chunks so that you may be able to have developers fund our infrastructure? Because I've never heard that as a pathway to allow for development, to allow for projects to pop up as a priority. So it sounds to me like you want this project, this meets you halfway. Is that what I'm hearing?
The applicant has a choice. They have the choice about how they meet the concurrency requirement, and this is, we have the 6 that I described for you, and
Yeah.
this is the one they chose.
But the county also has a choice of whether you meet them halfway with the rest of the project, right? Because they're just providing asphalt, you know, a road. There's a lot more involved with the engineering in this project, correct?
The way we read the concurrency ordinance, it doesn't seem like there's a way that we can contribute to their substantial contribution per the concurrency ordinance. It's something that they have to fund entirely on their own.
All right, let me restate this. They're providing a road to meet their concurrency need. There's still a full intersection, and that's a lot of concrete and other engineering. I'm not an engineer, but I know that there's a whole lot there which would take the county to agree that you actually want that there, correct?
There's quite a bit left to do. We don't think that the intersection necessarily needs to be constructed in order for their project to move forward. But we think it's a good idea to construct that intersection.
Okay.
So was the intersection not a part of 3029A, or is it a part? Like, does that make any sense?
Well,
'Cause-
the intent was that the road coming down from Luther Road would ultimately connect through the portion of 79th that's already there
Right.
and connected to Johnson Creek Boulevard. As Rick noted, the intersection's a good idea to provide for the traffic. I don't know if you're all aware, this is the little stub section of 79th that's kind of behind the Fred Meyer over there. Okay.
And there is a separate project for the intersection improvement.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yes.
I just, what kind of makes me wonder is you never know when development's going to happen, and right now we're in the middle of a boom. And you'd wonder if looking, rather than moving stuff together, like, should we be seeking?
Right. Your
to keep-
suggestion is, should we be splitting out other projects? in order
Yeah,
to
like, I
try and
realize,
fund
like,
other
you could call it
projects?
like
Yeah.
this, and we call it, you know, the projects, and you have like total project A, so that it makes it easier for this. That's what I'm kind of blown away by, that when we see this stuff, to be aware that, you know, if zoning allows for apartments or allows for something big to occur, like many parts of unincorporated urban Clackamas County, why wouldn't we be doing that more? That's kind of the one thing that popped out at me.
We don't.
Because we just did a whole lot with that transportation project, and all that's ready to go where apartments can pop into a good portion of that, from what I remember.
Oh, we're waiting for funding on it, right?
Well, no, you've got a nursery in the middle of that. You have all that land where you could have like a major development drop in there tomorrow the moment the guy goes, I don't like nurseries anymore. I would like to retire, right? Like that, like you look at it, there is an irresistible pull for that. And we were arguing whether or not a road went all the way through. You know what I mean? Like I don't understand why we weren't arguing like, hey, we should be thinking ahead and like using this opportunity, this plan to break out infrastructure opportunities for people who want to build that. So it just, that's what kind of gets me looking back to the last meeting I was at. So, I'm really fascinated by that. So how does this process work that someone's building it and they have a concurrency? Is that, I mean, is that just something at a planner level that you all know that and he comes with a proposal, or?
We've seen a draft traffic impact study that's identified a couple of intersections that won't operate per our standard.
I
So
see.
that's how we know.
So he's seeking to do this, and he looks at it, and then he comes with a suggestion, and based on your concurrency, that he's got those options. This was a suggestion, you're seeking to get him there.
And in order to fix their intersection, intersection failures that
Yeah,
one of them already exists, the other one would be created. It'd be multi-millions of dollars in order to fix those problems. So that's why the concurrency ordinance exists, is basically we get a piece of our planned infrastructure and then the developer can move forward.
Seeing no other questions, why don't we finish up with the staff report and we'll
Okay.
move on to public testimony. Thank you, Rick.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Just the last couple of things we wanted to cover here. We noticed this per our legislative amendment notices. This went out for a 35-day notice. It was sent to all the cities in the county, the community planning organization and hamlets. It was sent to DLCD, Metro, ODOT, and other interested agencies, published in the newspaper, and posted on the county's social media outlets. We had not received any comments in writing or in person on these amendments. We also analyzed findings with regard to this. We looked at it in comparison to our existing transportation system plan, and it was entirely consistent with that set of policies. We also looked at statewide planning goals and guidelines. Your staff report goes into a great deal more information on that, but basically there were no issues with regard to statewide planning goals 1 to 15, and statewide planning goals 16 through 19 don't apply in Clackamas County. We also looked at it with regard to consistency with the Metro Regional Transportation Function Plan. This is a plan that Metro produces and adopts on about an every 5-year basis that sets the standards broadly that all of the local governments in the Metro region are required to follow. We reviewed this particular project, or these amendments, I should say, with regard to the requirements of the Metro Regional Transportation Functional Plan, and all of these projects fit with that particular plan. And so what we're recommending to you tonight is that you advance each of these items or recommend them to the Board of County Commissioners. And so that would be to replace adopted figures 5-1 A to F, urban cross-sections, and figure 5-2 A to F, rural cross-sections, with the revised figures that you looked at this evening, figure 5-1 A to E, because remember we took one out, and figure 5-2 A to E. We also recommend that you recommend to the Board of County Commissioners that they replace Appendix A7, the Southeast 172nd Avenue, 190th Drive Corridor Management Plan, with the revised version that you reviewed this evening. And then finally, to make the change in Table 5-3C, Long-Term Capital Projects, and Map 5-11A, to remove project number 3029 and replace it with two projects, 3029A extending from Luther Road to Johnson Creek Boulevard, and project 3029B extending from Johnson Creek Boulevard to King Road. So that completes my presentation. There's the date and time of the Board of County Commissioners hearing. But I'd be happy to respond to any last questions that you might have before you go to the public.
I think we're questioned out, unless there are other questions that I see. So thank you very much, Steve. So I am going to continue through our script real quick. We've been here for a while, but I'm going to try and, we don't have that much public testimony, and then we'll probably take a break after that, unless there's anyone dying for a need to break. So, so the next item, as we move through this, I've heard from the staff that there's been no additional correspondence received. I believe we've already considered technical information from other government agencies. The next step here is to take testimony from representatives of CPOs, hamlets, and villages. I do actually know that we have the chair of our CPO who's reading away. I don't think he's here for this meeting, but you're welcome to comment, Mike, if you would like.
Somebody needed a ride.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for getting him to our meeting.
Well, I've been doing it for years.
Okay, so now we can move on to testimony from any other individuals, the moment you all have been waiting for. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on the hearing before us tonight? Yes, no, maybe? I'm seeing people. Okay, I think we have no public testimony. You're welcome to participate if you would like, but totally understand if you do not. So hearing none, no other testimony. We've had the staff report. Unless you guys have any final comments, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Martha, do you have anything to add? Okay. Help me out, you guys. All right, so at this point, we can move into a planning commission discussion and action. Maybe, first of all, does anyone need a break? Okay, I'm seeing no, so we're gonna just funnel through and get this done. So why don't we go and do a straw poll? Let's just figure out where people are at, and then hopefully we can move forward. Louise, would you mind starting? Do you have any thoughts on the proposal?
Well, I'm still a little bit on number 3, the splitting the two projects. I have a little bit of confusion, I guess, from what Mark said, because I'm coming in new on this. I'd like to hear a little bit more about, you know, the fact that we'd be splitting it and not completing the intersection and leaving the other project undone. And so what is a further down the line impact to the county financially and what have you? I'd like a little more information.
So good. We'll flag that and we'll have that conversation. Murph?
I'm kind of on the same page as she is. I imagine riding down this street, coming to an intersection that has not been changed yet on my bike. What do I do? You know, is there going to be an improvement on this for public safety to get across this intersection? Johnson Creek Boulevard, as we know, has a pretty high volume going down it. And that's a pretty treacherous area, pulling in and out. So if we're trying to relieve pedestrian traffic off of 82nd, if that's what this proposal is for, shouldn't it be completed through the intersection, at least get across 90 or Johnson Creek Boulevard? That's my concern.
Mary?
I think most of what staff is proposing makes sense. I think that the breaking up of the projects, we do want to flag that it causes some potential issues at the intersection, but it sounds like staff is working on plans to get that under control, and it sounds like it's a nice method to get the project partially built sooner rather than later, since we didn't have funding identified for it. So I'm generally in favor, as staff proposed.
Christine?
I'm in favor as staff proposed as well. I think that the concurrency requirement to me appears to be met. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't allow the developer to do the portion of the project that meets that requirement, and then we'll use it as an impetus to finish it up and do the intersection when they're able. I'm pretty comfortable with staff recommendations.
Mark?
My only concern was multiple commissioners asked about where the bike lane was going in the new, and I heard that you were putting the bike lane behind the, planning strip. But as I'm driving around this map right here, that's not what's occurring that I'm seeing. And code says that's what that looks like. It doesn't give an either or option. So I would just point that out. Multiple commissioners said, staff said, yeah, that's an option where you could move that's what I heard. So I just had a little bit of a concern if you actually want that. I really don't care. The driving on the street, if they give that 8 feet, that's more than enough. I'd feel safe on a bike in traffic. I would point out, we've seen, so new commissioners, not so much, but we've seen 2 presentations on the transportation plan for what was former Damascus, now Happy Valley. Seeing it on this map all at once, that's a lot of roads. I mean, that is pure urbanization right there. It's gonna happen, but I'd like to hear more about what's expected on the county side of that, because I don't believe in our coming up here, we're talking at all about what the Damascus / unincorporated Clackamas piece is gonna be, and that's a lot of new roads, and the construction's right now. You can see where that's happening when you drive down 172nd. So I'm totally in support of it, but that's what I'd see and bring up to the new commissioners, that, hey, there's basically a new city being built right now, and it will be putting pressure on unincorporated Clackamas.
You're stealing my thunder. That's usually my speech. I'll just kind of where I'm at. I agree. I'm supportive of the staff proposal. I got the sense from the maps, because I'm one of the ones that raised the configuration issues, and I'm actually very happy to see that happening on this particular project. And I got the sense that the code is a standard, but there's lots of ways to modify that standard in future projects where that makes sense. It sounds like they're obviously able to do it here. In theory, they would be able to do it elsewhere in the county. And it's a matter of encouraging that thought as we go through the development process. In terms of the splitting of the projects, I definitely can see where you're coming from, where you've got half a project and it makes, transportation difficult. At the same time, I think it's great that we can get half a project funded, and hopefully we'll create the impetus to figure the other half, and I think it's gonna relieve some congestion out there. So I think, overall, I think there's never a perfect answer, but I think it's moving us in the right direction. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. So it sounds like what I got from, people are pretty comfortable with 1 and 2, and maybe we need to have a little more conversation on the third piece of that. In terms of this, how are people feeling now that we've heard from everyone about the splitting of the projects? Is that something that folks can support, or do we want to have more conversation?
No, I think it's a good idea.
Louise, how, you raised it initially.
Yeah, at time, how long, I know we want to get part done, and that's good, but how long? In other words, we don't have any idea at all how long it'll take to get to the intersection, how long it'll take to get to the second part, the B part. If I thought it was coming quickly, but what time? It's just out there. In other words, it could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I kind of like to hear more.
Right. I don't know if staff wanted to comment on.
Just to state, because they couldn't, 300 units at current market values throwing off property tax to the county sure makes it happen a lot faster than waiting on what the future may hold for
the county.
Yeah.
So with regard to this particular project and when the rest of it will move forward, the intersection and the south portion of this extension of 79th, as I pointed out in the presentation, this is on our long-term capital projects list. So we don't have any funding dedicated to projects on this list, and are really just, they're on that list so that we can wait for an opportunity, either, an opportunity that's related to a development as this is, or an opportunity that's related to some sort of grant funding or something like that. So 2 years ago, I guess I would have said I didn't think this would ever happen. Today, there have been several transportation funding measures that have taken place in Oregon. You probably have all heard about HB 2017. That is adding a substantial amount of money to the county's transportation funding for transportation improvements on an annual basis. And we're continuing to work on other approaches to raising funds as well. You heard that I mentioned that our traffic section is seeking grant funding through ODOT to make those intersection improvements because of the safety issues that have already been raised. So I can't give you a date certain, but I can tell you it's a lot more likely to get built now than it was just a couple of years ago due to the way the funding environment has changed. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Rick?
Well, I just want to add that 4029, if that entire project was built tomorrow, it still wouldn't include the intersection improvements. So there's still two separate projects, so we're no further away from getting that signal project. I would say that due to this development, though, we are putting that as a higher priority. We're seeking those separate grant funds to try to make it happen. The development agency, Clackamas County Development Agency, is interested in funding a project. So we can't speak to a specific timeline, but it is a high priority for us. So I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
When we vote, will it be on each of the three individually or as a package?
As a package,
We can do whichever you
But-
prefer, actually. I mean, under our, so we will probably move it as one package, but if folks feel that they want to split it out, we can do that as well. What is your preference? Would you like to split it out?
Perhaps, I'm thinking about that, and
Okay.
I didn't know, again, I'm
So,
new,
so why don't we do this? I think one of us is ready to put a motion on the table, and let's hear the motion, and we can either vote on it right away, or if you'd like to split it, let us know and we'll do that.
So I would move that we recommend approval of ZDO 270 as presented by staff tonight and in the staff report.
I second.
So we have a motion and a second. Now we move into the discussion phase on that motion. And Louise, it's entirely your call. We can move to a vote on the entire motion, or if you'd like to split it, sorry to put you on the spot. It's everyone, if anyone would like to split this up, you're welcome to do that. Just let me know.
I'd like to split it.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and, Mary, if you would go ahead and move each recommendation on, let's go ahead and make a motion on each one, and then we'll vote on each one separately. Does that make sense?
Okay. So I would move that we recommend approval for the first section of ZDO 270 to replace adopted figure 5-1A through F, and figure 5-2A through F, and figure 5-1A through E, and 5-2A through E.
Christine, do we have a second? Is there any further discussion on that first segment? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So we'll move to the second motion from Mary.
So I would move we recommend approval on ZDO 270, Section 2, to modify Appendix A.7 Southeast 172nd Avenue / 190th Drive Corridor Management Plan as presented in the staff report and tonight.
Christine?
Second.
Any other discussion on the second item here? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Do we need to discuss anything before I make the next motion?
No, I don't think we need,
Yeah, we'll go ahead and make the motion, and we can certainly have some more discussion if we like it, so.
Okay, then I would move we recommend approval of ZDO 270, Section 3, to modify Table 5-3C Long-Term Capital Projects as presented by staff in the staff report and the presentation tonight.
Second.
Thank you, Christine. Any other discussion on the third item?
Just another question about, again, we're building the part of it, not the intersection, not the second part. Safety concerns, has that really been studied about, being that it's going to end, and then where will the bicycles go, exactly? In other words, have we really looked at that? I want to make sure that there's not safety concerns.
And I can address that. Our traffic division has done a safety study at the intersection, and so they had to do that in preparation for seeking the grant funds. So we have a good idea of what the needs are at that location. But as we noted, we don't have any funding. And just kind of an editorial comment, this is the way transportation planning goes. So we often, usually, identify needs and then hunt around for money until we eventually find it and can do the improvements that need to be done. So this is not at all an unusual scenario for us.
And I think I would add, the project itself is trying to solve a safety problem of a lot of congestion on 82nd and getting some of those pedestrians and bikers off that main thoroughfare. So I think just the fact that there are other options will probably improve safety as well, so.
I guess I'm thinking, but where will they go? Like, if their journey is further south and it stops, where are they going to be? Are they going to be naturally detoured off someplace?
Right.
What will be the flow?
My assumption is they're going to continue on the existing roads, much like they're doing right now, right? I don't think there are people traveling these routes now, until that happens, so.
Is there a bike path on Johnson Creek Boulevard from 79th down?
I don't think there's a bike path on that segment of Johnson Creek Boulevard. You really have two options at that point. You can go, if you're continuing to go north-south, you can go back over to 82nd, and if you're familiar with 82nd, it changes significantly once you go south of Johnson Creek Boulevard. It's quite a bit wider. ODOT has been improving the sidewalks on that section, and it has bike lanes. So that section south of Johnson Creek Boulevard on 82nd is quite a bit nicer than the part to the north. You can also go to the west, and I think you probably have to go all the way over to Bell. And Bell was reconstructed with new sidewalks and bike lanes in 2014 and 15. All the way from Johnson Creek Boulevard down to King Road. And so Bell is also a possibility. It is, as you say, a little bit of a diversion from the straight north-south path, but at least it's a good facility.
East-west through here has the best bicycle transportation probably in the county because you have the Springwater Trail paralleling Johnson Creek.
Yeah, that's true.
So just to describe.
Right.
If you haven't driven around Milwaukee, this side of it, you can't get through it without driving around. Like there's a Safeway in the middle of a landmass in a way you'd see nowhere else. So anything that increases, the neighborhood access probably does a great deal to reduce trips off of Johnson Creek or off of 82nd. So, I don't know if this is the street that I think it is, but if it is, it's like a large alley. You know what I mean? If this is what I'm thinking of. And this would make a big deal of difference if you live, parallel on 82nd, how it backs up. It would, you'd be taking probably 100 or 200 trips easy off of that Johnson Creek 82nd intersection if you can get over here to get to your neighborhood.
What's the distance of that project, the A?
It's about a half a mile.
Half mile, okay.
Any other discussion? I think we're ready for a vote. So all those in favor of the third motion here signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Excellent. So I think that concludes the hearing on ZDO 270. Thank you very much, Steve, Martha.
Thank you.
So I think we can move on to other business. We don't have too much. We'll get everybody out of here. So I will just say that, I don't know about the rest of you, but I was a bit caught off guard at the last hearing that it was Mike McAllister's last day. And Murph and I were able to make it to a really great retirement party that Darcy and his wife put on, which was great. There you go. But I regret that we didn't have an opportunity to give him a send-off. But I know that he's now retired, and he has nothing better to do but watch public access TV at 3 in the morning. So I just wanted to say, Mike, I've got all this paper coming to me. Mike was my first introduction to this commission, and I think like a lot of you, he was very warm and welcoming and was a great mentor to a lot of us over the years. So we're going to miss him a lot. I think Lindsay actually said it best at the retirement party where she said, Mike was always happy. And I think that's really true. Like whenever we all interacted with Mike, it was very clear that he loved his job and he really appreciated all of us and all the people that he worked with, and he will be missed greatly. But with that being said, and I think Mike would agree, I'm really excited about the direction that we're moving and that I don't think a lot of you have been updated about. So we kind of wanted to give a little bit of an update about where the planning director search has been and where it is going. And I will be corrected for some misstatements at some point here, but long story short, the position of planning director was opened up. There were multiple people who applied. There were multiple interviews that went into first and second interviews, and the hiring committee ultimately came to the conclusion that none of the people who they had been interviewing were the right fit for the county. And so there was also some discussion that the people who were the right fit were already here. And so as of now, we do not have a planning director per se. That position will be reopened sometime in the fall. There will be an open hiring process. In the meantime, our own Jennifer Hughes has had her arm twisted a little bit, maybe not so much twisted. I hope she came on willingly. But she is she and Lindsay are sharing some of these responsibilities around the planning director position, and I'll let Jennifer fill in. But I think the hope is that Jennifer will kind of settle into this position and apply when it's opened, and we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, I think, you all know Jennifer and Lindsay are extremely talented, and I'm personally really excited that we have kind of kept things in-house. I think that's going to help both this commission and the county, and the planning department move forward very, very well. So thank you, Jennifer. Would you like to add, correct me?
Thank you for the kind words. I don't think there was anything that I need to correct, really. So Lindsay has been the planning manager now for over a year, and so what they've decided to do is make an interim appointment of me at that same position and to essentially divide the duties. It won't be quite the bright line as, that this may sound like, but generally she will focus more on what we call current planning, so land use application review, public service, those types of things. And I will focus more on what we're calling long-range planning, but it's really that work program that you all review every year that has this year 7 land use projects on it, and sort of shepherding that through the process, and then doing some other general administrative things and coordination activities with cities and regional government, and all of that will kind of be on my plate. And so we would anticipate that model continuing through 2018. And I've heard everything from a recruitment opening for planning director as early as November, maybe not until January. But anyway, sometime in the relatively near term with the goal of having a director on board early in 2019. So that's what's happening.
Well, I know you and Lindsay are a great team, so we're excited to have you.
I'm excited. All joking aside, there was a little arm twisting, but I am excited. So the big issue is that I'm working full-time now, which I haven't done for 15 years. So I'm like going to need naps and things, but other than that, it's going to be fine.
Excellent.
So.
Are there any other new business that we need to discuss?
So I was just going to mention the papers that were handed out. Did you hand yours as well, Martha? Okay, so what you have, and for those of you who are new, or if we've maybe not been as consistent in the past about this, even for those of you who aren't new, what we try to do is follow up after you've had an item and made a recommendation to the board. It's kind of nice to know what the board did with it. And so these are these little summary sheets that we fill out and get back to you after the board has taken action. And so one of them, and it's completely my fault, is belated because the board actually took action in May. That was ZDO audit phase 4. And that was, the board only made one change to your recommendation. The staff had proposed that we have a setback exemption, a side and rear yard setback exemption for certain HVAC units associated with single-family dwellings. They opted not to adopt that. It's still the case that in some zones, those units don't have a setback, but we were going to make it broader. And they decided, primarily due to concerns about noise for neighboring properties, that they would not adopt that element, and the remaining package of audit amendments was approved as you recommended. The second phase of the audit that you considered within the past year, so that was actually phase 6, and that was the one that was more recent. They, at their August hearing, approved exactly what you recommended unanimously, and then that was formally adopted on September 6th and will take effect on October 2nd. So I'm feeling pretty good about the amount of progress that we all made together in the last 9 months on the audit. It feels like we really did, in fact, move the ball this year, which is very nice. And then Martha can give you the update on the one that's really of interest to everyone, which is the accessory dwelling units.
So the board held a hearing on August 1st for ZDO 269, the accessory dwelling unit package, which also included the accessory historic dwellings. And they voted unanimously to approve that package of amendments with one change. And recall, you had recommended an increase to 900 square feet for the ADU size, and the board did agree with that recommendation. What they did not adopt is the repeal of the owner occupancy requirement. So that is still a requirement where it was previously a requirement, and it is now a requirement in all areas where that newly allow ADUs, and it's a requirement with the accessory historic dwellings. And there was a lot of conversation about absentee owners, a lot of the same conversation that happened here at the hearing. And so they decided to keep the owner occupancy requirement, at least for now. But other than that, it was adopted and became effective September 6th.
Any questions for staff on those reports? With that, I think we can do a schedule review really quickly and. Oh, and minutes, thank you. Good call. So we have minutes in our packet that I will try to find. There we go.
From July 23rd.
So we received these in our packet. Would anyone? I have to put this closer to my mouth, apparently. I see this as an ongoing thing, that he'll just kind of show up in the back of the room and say, talk louder. So would anyone like to make a motion to approve the July 23rd minutes?
I move to approve the July 23rd meeting minutes.
Thank you, Louise. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mary. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any? One abstention from Mark. Motion carries. Schedule review. We're not going to see each other again until November 5th, it looks like.
Well, so a couple of things. I would term this schedule extremely tentative. So we're now figuring out, we're in the process of sort of shifting the ship in another direction. So because the last phase of the ZDO audit now is complete and the accessory dwelling unit project is complete, we now need to decide what we do next. We've got 7 projects that were on this year's work program that was approved by the board. One of them, the ADU one, is complete. Couple of them are sort of ongoing throughout this year and may not, in fact, result in any actual action by the Planning Commission and the board in this fiscal year. There's some planning efforts and some technical analysis going on, both for the Park Avenue Station Area Plan and for the housing needs analysis and task force that the board has convened. And so eventually, those will likely result in amendments that come before you, but I suspect that may not be this fiscal year. So that really leaves 4 projects that we need to prioritize. One is the potential of limiting the number of marijuana grow licenses permitted per property. That's something that the board asked us to look at for this upcoming year. Another relates to amending the comprehensive plan policies that dictate when you're rezoning property for low-density residential use, which zone gets applied, because we have a wide range of lot sizes, all the way from 2,500 square foot zones to 30,000 square foot zone. And there's some policies that guide that, and for a couple of different reasons, we're going to take a look at those policies. So that's the second one. There is another phase, what we hope and believe will be the final phase of the ZDO audit this year. And then the final one is short-term rentals and the question about whether we're going to explicitly authorize those in the zoning ordinance. So We were moving forward, and this still may happen, this is still staff's recommendation, to move forward with the marijuana amendment next. The major reason for that is that from a staff perspective, it's relatively simple. It doesn't require a lot of upfront work. The drafting will be easy. It's different in terms of public participation, obviously. We anticipate that it will generate a lot of interest. It will require individual property owner notice. For those of you who went through prior rounds of marijuana amendments, you'll recall 400 people at the Abernathy Center. So it generally does stir up a lot of interest on potentially both sides of the issue. But from a staff perspective, we can get it out the door quickly. And so that's different than at least a couple of the other projects on the list. So our recommendation is to do that next. Hence, we had reserved this potential date in November. Given my new role, it is very clear to me that the audit is getting shifted, so this December date absolutely will not be happening. The audit will be shifted more toward the end of this fiscal year in terms of hearings as opposed to earlier. Short-term rentals, we expect is going to take a fair amount of staff time up front, and so that's another one we're planning to do later in the year, and then that leaves the comp plan amendments for the low-density residential policies, and so I was planning to slot that in between marijuana and the two that take longer. So we are going to the board, this is a very long way of saying that we're going to the board next Tuesday in a policy session to do a couple of things. Tell them what we've just told you and say, does this sound good to you? Does this match your priorities? Are you okay with this timing? And to clarify that the scope of the marijuana project is really what they want as the scope. Because this, it does continue to come up. Public comments at the business meeting, people scheduling meetings, with individual commissioners to ask for specific changes, all of which is perfectly legitimate. But it's the question of, do we want to do more than just the limitation on the grow licenses? And so I'll get some guidance on that on Tuesday, and then I can let you know what the schedule looks like after that happens. Then the other thing is the possibility of potentially a session that we would use one of our meetings for some sort of training, study sessions, information, those types of things, and I think we're all
Yeah,
going to meet
that's what I was going to mention too. So Jennifer and I and Mary are going to meet later this week to talk about some of the things we were thinking about as some sort of training session, particularly since we have a new set of commissioners and looking at, what kind of training do we need to provide folks, especially as we move into things like marijuana and whatnot. And so I would expect to see some work sessions on the agenda so that we can kind of make sure we're all on the same page and up to speed. And in that light, if folks have thoughts on specific things that they would like to learn more about or questions they have that you think would make good training opportunities, feel free to let me know, and we'll make sure we have that discussion with Jennifer and try and put some of that stuff together. So
I do think we can cancel the September 26th. Is that the right date? 24th. We will not have a meeting on
So
September 24th.
if anything, we'll meet again in October sometime.
Correct, yes.
Any other questions on the schedule review?
Just a comment. Chair Bernard begged us not to talk about marijuana,
And here we are.
and we've had it twice since he talked about that. And I'm hearing he directed it, right? Like the commission?
Oh, well, the commission, you all saw the work program as well. I don't remember whether there were changes made between your recommendation and what the board adopted. But yes, the board, not just Chair Bernard, but in general, the board has expressed considerable interest in looking at limiting the number of grow licenses. The concern are the ones, and there's not a lot of these, but there are some, perhaps you've seen them, that are what has been called condominiumized, where they're starting to look like industrial parks, where they have, 36 different growers in these little, tenant spaces on what was formerly agricultural property with impacts associated with that. And I think that's really the driving force for this proposal. So, yeah.
And just to ask staff, outside of zoning, has the county considered ways to maybe they've got an actual impact to systems when they're doing that? You know what I mean? In a way, that to look at it broader than just the land use zoning, but also consider the way that we should be figuring out a way to manage what their real impact is, because we're not thinking about that. 20 years from now, they may have a real impact to services that you'd wish you had some way to track. It's what I kind of wonder as this industry evolves. I realize that's outside of zoning, but it does touch with that. If you're, from what you said though, the short-term rentals, I think that's probably the biggest priority, You know, if that's like on the back burner, I'd really like to see that sooner, given that tons of people are doing it, you know, in a gray area.
Yeah, we're definitely committed to moving forward with that this year for sure. The concern with that is just in terms of timing, I want to be conscious of the need to use some of the first part of the year to get something done so we don't, have everything on the back end. And we anticipate with the short-term rentals, the need to have a little more coordination with other departments, tourism, the building department, public health, all the things that can potentially come in, and to look at regulations adopted by other jurisdictions to try to understand what worked, what didn't work, what are the issues we should be thinking about if in fact we are going to regulate these. One option, of course, is just to say it's allowed, but the assumption I think staff has had is that the board is interested in allowing them with some sort of regulation, and what would that look like? And, so we feel like that's going to take a few months to get that all pulled together, and so we couldn't imagine being here for hearings before 2019.
And the short-term rentals are like Airbnb, bread and breakfast, little, what is it? Or just you're renting out your house for short periods of time? What are they?
All the above, potentially.
okay.
Our code already deals with bed and breakfasts. There are standards for bed and breakfasts. And, certainly we can look at those standards in the context of a new proposal as well. But generally with the B&B, the property owner is there, so it is the model where they are the proprietor, kind of what you think of as a quintessential B&B. You go and you stay in their home, and then they serve you breakfast and chat with you on the patio, and that kind of model. And I think that feels a little different than when you have an absentee owner, because there's this sense that maybe it won't be monitored as well as if the proprietor's actually living there. And so the types of complaints that we tend to get from neighbors are what you would expect when people are on vacation in their neighborhood, right? It's noise and cars and primarily that we hear about. And our code right now does not speak to that issue about about the Airbnb model where the owner is typically gone and they just rent their entire house out. And so what we have essentially determined is that if you're renting for less than month to month, it's not permitted. Now, having said that, we know it's happening, and it's been happening for years, even before Airbnb. And it's just something that we've never really taken on in the context of the zoning ordinance. And so the board this year said, we want to look at it.
And final comment on that too is I'd love to hear an updated review on the code we passed for the homeless village.
Oh,
So
yeah,
I've
that's
seen
that actually would be
Facebook
interesting.
out there of politicians swinging hammers and being present.
There's all kinds of
It was
press
supposed to be
coverage,
done
yeah.
before winter, you know what I mean?
It's opening
So
this
we
week.
moved heaven and earth for code for that in a way that typically, that would be impossible if it wasn't, I think, fashionable right now with what we've got. I'd be curious to see where that kind of fit, given what we went through.
Yeah, I don't know if there are any impacts, yeah.
Well, and did the code actually meet the need? Like I'd review, like, we talked all back and forth about it. We promulgated code, given it, like, where did that really land in the real world in under a year from it occurring? Because that moved very fast.
Yeah,
And
I
we
agree.
didn't get anything like this on that, so the comparison from what our conversation was and our recommendation.
to what was adopted.
To what was
Okay.
actually adopted would
Sure.
be beautiful to see.
Yeah, so we can give you that, and the project is actually having its sort of ribbon-cutting grand opening this week. So I don't know exactly what the move-in timeframe is, but it is nearing completion, and it is a reality on that one site.
So, Mr. Chair, January, February, line up a tour. I'd be curious to see what it's like, a few months in the middle of winter, compared to just out of fascination.
On a Friday.
Yeah, we can find out. I
Yeah,
don't know.
Dignity Village before you tour this one. Dignity Village works.
Clackamas County is better anyways, so it'll be better no matter what.
I'll make a note of that. That's a good idea.
So is this a project off Jennifer that's on,
Yeah.
okay, by Cary Creek?
Yeah,
It's also
but-
a habitat
Chair
restoration.
Pasco asked what we'd like training on, and that is absolutely just, academically, I'm curious. We moved that code, I would call it a regulatory subsidy where we basically made things occur that we'd never normally allow. It got built in under a few months, then we get to go look at it and kind of review what we did. Rare do you get that kind of feedback loop on what you thought about.
That's a cool idea. Yeah, it's a cool idea.
So we can find out what the options are for a tour. I imagine there are going to be some limitations, some sensitivity when people are actually living there in terms of how these tours work and who leads you through and how that all works, but we can certainly find out and see what the options would be for that.
And I'm also curious if any other jurisdictions followed suit with what we did.
Not that I've heard, but it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I can certainly see whether the folks working on that project are aware. I mean, some were ahead of us. You know, Portland and Eugene had already,
But they
for sure.
leapfrogged, and they
So,
didn't do this.
they didn't do right, the same type of code.
I'm curious.
Correct, yes.
There is a habitat restoration project right next to it if we want to piggyback.
To see both?
Yeah, fine.
Is Wes doing that?
I
Do you
think
know?
so.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's a great transition. Thanks for that. I've got a note on that. Jennifer and Mary and I are actually meeting, I think, on Friday of this week. So if folks have thoughts about other ideas like that they want to run past us, that let us know. I think, that we've got some open time here actually to do some of that training, and we should take advantage of it. So
Yeah, that'd be excellent. Yeah.
with that, I think we are ready to adjourn. So thank you all. Thank you both for making it in tonight. And otherwise, we were wondering if we were going to be able to have a meeting.
Well, I
So.
was supposed to be in Utah.